The Machine Age has quickly become one of my favourite Stellaris expansions. I put a video out last week and I was on the fence. But here's the thing. I have not been able to put it down. I tried out the Cybernetic Creed Origin and it felt lackluster, and I stand by that. But I was only seeing a fraction of the changes. I didn't touch on Machine Empires at all, which is, the Machine Age. They're pretty important. Since that video, I've been peeling back more of the expansion, trying out new things, and it's been a hell of a journey. So I'm going to run through another campaign, from setup to a natural stopping point. Use that to highlight more features from the expansion and show them playing out in real time. I will be focusing on the Arc Welders today and how this new origin can help you explode into the mid-game. So a whole bunch of new features come into play in Empire creation. Now I don't need to explain to you how much an impact little changes can make to the game, but these additions are anything but small. The big one is robots receiving the gift of free will. No longer are you tied to Gustale consciousness. Every government type is now an option. Machine Empires have gone from being a limited playstyle to the most flexible one. I lent into the new possibilities by picking a megacorp, and I went with the scavenger trait just because I've never tried that before. Civics wise, again, new ways to fine tune what you want to do. Adaptive frames was the one I was keen to try, as this enacts the game's new mechanic, auto modding. Basically, pops with this trait will automatically modify themselves to be best equipped for the job you give them. Make a clerk into a miner and they will pop to the Robo Body mod shop and grab themselves some drill hands and get to work. It's a one-size-fits-all perk. You have the flexibility to throw pops into any role and you don't feel like you're losing efficiency. Now obviously, fully min-maxing everything will always give you bigger gains, but if that sounds overwhelming or just a bit boring, auto-modding traits are a really solid pick. The Arc Origins seems really strong on paper, but having it play out was interesting. Arc Furnaces are a really strong superstructure in the late early game, so starting with one is obviously great, but the big gains come from it being upgraded a few times. While the initial form is strong, it's not game breaking. It's a healthy boost to your materials, but its true potential requires a hefty investment with alloys and Unity, and you're not going to have them sitting around for a while. I toyed with the Arc Furnaces in my first playthrough, but taking the Origin does a better job of pointing you in the right direction. It will highlight a system near you that's ripe for placing your second furnace, and I found this little nudge in the right direction really useful. The game had singled out this system. I found it just a good exercise to look at it, compare it to others, and work out why is this one better. It definitely makes it a lot easier when planning any future expansions. Ultimately, you want to look for a system with lots of bodies, several planets, moons, asteroid belts, that sort of thing. If you come across a juicy system and it happens to have a molten planet, make a note. That'll be a prime spot for some large-scale planetary drilling. Now, I don't know if there's a simpler way to easily identify key candidates. I was generally just using the details tab and checking systems one by one, which is pretty slow. If anyone has got a better method, please let me know in the comments. The Arc Welders definitely have a fast track with their early economy. You're guaranteed to get the furnace tech pretty quickly, and given the output even in its base form, getting these systems marked out and developed is going to be a big boost. Now, it wasn't as huge a push as I thought it would be, but that's because I was not running my corporation very well at all. I actually have no idea how to play Megacorps. Yeah, I probably should have said that earlier. But not long into the game, I'd have to get my act into order, as my neighbour also happened to be a bunch of ruthless capitalists. In fact, they were the spitting image of my empire, just fleshier. But I wasn't too fazed. As we all know, the flesh is weak and steel is superior. It didn't take long for negotiations to turn into insults into hostility, and the Zaxuan company gunned for my territory. Jealousy is an ugly shade. The first Corpo War was a strange one. Neither of us had a good choke point, so the entire conflict resorted to a game of whack-a-mole. I'd like to pretend that this was all a master plan, because it did end up working, but it was all completely accidental. As the war waged on, my fleet was bolstered by scavenged ships after each altercation, and my fleshy counterparts waved the white flag. There was some breathing room, and I used that to try and work out how megacorps work. Despite having a functioning arc furnace, my numbers really were not that great. I figured making friends and setting up branch offices was probably the smart move, but as negotiations ticked on, I grew impatient and decided to invade. Subjugation is sort of like making friends, right? Just a forced friendship, under threats of death. My new vassal wasn't as keen on the relationship as I was, and after a couple of years of really trying to make it work, they rebelled. So I sent a fully armed battalion to remind them of my love, and just as we were working out the kinks, my fleshy counterparts in the Zaxo and company decided they were about ready for round 2, and thus out of nowhere began the Second Corpo War. Good old whack-a-mole tactics would not work this time. The slimy Zaxoans outnumbered me, so I did what any good CEO would do: threw money at someone else and get them to do the dirty work. I brought some mercenaries into the fray and used them as my front line against my meaty nemesis, employing the old Zap Brannigan tactic. I'd throw ship after ship until my foe had grown weary of killing, and then moved my fleet in to clean up. When it came to the counteroffensive, well, I'd equipped my people with all sorts of machine-age combat augments, so conquering planets was a walk in the park. The warbots stormed planet after planet until the rival corp waved the white flag once more. To finish off this thorn in my side, I needed more bodies. More bodies means more alloys. I had the furnaces, but they needed a few upgrades to hit their full potential. They're an investment, but once they're in the later stages, they will pay for themselves. Alloy production was way up. I was generating enough to comfortably create a couple of mercenary enclaves. If you don't make enclaves in your game, you should. They are great. I launched the Third Corpo War, and there was just no contest this time. As the furnaces fed the war machine, my fleet steamrolled across my organic doppelganger systems. After a blitzkrieg assault, they were subjugated. I'd originally thought the arc welders would have a hefty push in the early game with an immediate furnace. And while that is true to a degree, the real power tick comes a bit later. They have the tools to explode into the mid-game. It's also around this time that you'll have enough tradition upgrades to lock in one of the new Ascension trees. And these are really strong and very diverse. They've each got a very unique feel. Nanotech, I think, is the most interesting on paper, with huge potential. Seems like it's incredible for playing super wide and making a limitless number of nanite swarmers. Combine that with becoming the Crisis and boom, you're basically playing as Satana. Now, if only there was a way to make machines terravores. Virtuality is the opposite. Big penalties to empire size from planets, but limitless manpower. Create massive planets with tons of jobs, and virtual pops will fill every open position. You'll create a few insane hubs, and then if your opponents want a bit of the action and tries to take them by force, you just pull the plug and all those pops disappear. I do think this will be my next playthrough, as this has the potential to get to some very silly places, and I'm keen to see just how far it goes. The Ascension path I took in this game was modularity, and this just felt good. Pops have a greater output and get created faster, more army damage, more stability, more modification points. While the other trees may take you to outlandish places, this keeps in the standard machine trajectory, but just makes everything better. It's much cheaper to make species modifications too, so you can chop and change and upgrade and perfect to make your people infinitely better time after time. Honestly, I love all these. They each serve a purpose, and from what I tried, they feel strong and distinct. I always liked the idea of machine empires in Stellaris, but all my playthroughs would peter out as they all ended up feeling somewhat similar. But now the script has been flipped. In the last video, I said that the expansion was lacking in content, and I lumped it in with the middle of the pack. I was wrong. At this point, I'm putting the machine age on the level of Utopia. It really opens up the game in so many ways. Machine empires always felt restrictive, but now they have as many, if not more, options than their organic counterparts. My first run, I went cybernetic. I still think it's the weakest origin of the expansion, and I will not lie, that is a huge shame. Next, I went for synthetic fertility, and I did really enjoy that one. That put me at the point of, I think I can recommend this. Now, after diving into the machine empire side of things, that's tipped the scales even further. And still, there's a whole load more I haven't touched on. There's a whole crisis path which I toyed with in this run, but did not open up to. Diving into that is definitely going to be in my next empire, and if you want some insights to that, let me know in the comments and I can make another video on it. There's also the other Ascension paths. I went with modularity, which is the most vanilla of the lot. Virtuality and nanotech seem like they can go to some absurd places, and I'm eager to try those out too. I think the machine age is doing something really important, and funnily enough, it counters one of the points I made in the last video. I said that it's hard to tell what's new and what's working when there are more features and content just being slapped on the top. And I think that's definitely a problem with some of the more recent expansions. And I figured that was the same here. But the Machine Age isn't just adding more layers, it's revisiting old systems and redoing them, squeezing more out of them, and adding a bunch of depth that couldn't be achieved by just throwing another mechanic on the pile. This is definitely a good look for the game, and after a few disappointing expansions, I think this is the way forward. Don't keep building higher and higher on a cracked foundation. Look at parts players love and take them further. That's what they've done here, and while it wasn't immediately obvious to me, it left me with a really good feeling about what comes next. In terms of what happened with my empire, Robonia Incorporated, well, the status quo got upturned when the Great Khan united the clans and unleashed hell. Thankfully, there was a hive mind between me and them, but they didn't do much to stop the Khan barreling through the galaxy towards me. The hive bent the knee, pathetically, and I had a horde on my doorstep. Calling in every favor I had, I was able to halt the horde just shy of my capital, and as Doomsday was approaching, the Khan died, and the legions were taken aback by bickering and squabbling. I'd call that a miracle. My place in the galaxy was secure. I'd formed a trade league federation with a neighboring megacorp, and together we were dominating the Galactic Senate. Truly hypercapitalism at its most rampant. I really like the Ark world as origin, and it may become my go-to for machine empires. It felt comfortable in the early game, but it kicks in hard as you approach mid-game. In terms of the Scavenger Civic, which was also a first time for me, it was interesting. I wouldn't call it strong, it definitely helped in early defensive wars, but I don't see it as some powerful linchpin to build around. It's fun for a bit of role-playing, and I'd probably try it again with a real scrapper-centric empire and see how that fares. I'd originally planned to push the campaign on and lead into the Cosmogenesis crisis tree, but this doesn't feel like the right empire for it. That'll be an ambition for another batch of robots, which probably won't take long. I'm pretty damn addicted to playing machine empires right now. I literally want to do nothing else. There's a few of the original points about the expansion I do still stand by. I really wish they took cybernetic empires apart and put them back together, as they just don't feel as exciting or as interesting as I was expecting. I'm also not a fan of how all the decisions you make against Satana all converge on the same outcome. But I don't want to make too definitive a point here, as I've only played against her once. I don't know to what extent helping or hindering her has on her final strength, and if any of you have a better idea, let me know down below. Likewise, I've really enjoyed making some videos on Stellaris. If you want more, let me know. If you want to see Cosmogenesis in action or have a bizarre empire set up for me to try, drop me a comment and I will give it a stab. I'm no expert on the game by any means, but I enjoy it. If you get a kick out of people failing with the best intentions, I'm your guy. Thank you so much if you stuck around till now. Be sure to like and subscribe for various other strategy content soon, and be sure to have a check out the other videos on the channel. There's all sorts of things for all sorts of tastes. There's even more stuff on the Patreon link in the info box. Go have a gander. Anyway, you've been great, thanks for everything, and until next time, ciao.